Ruth, yeah, hang on, I'll just find it. My hands are so cold. Joshua judges Ruth, right. Ruth is just a lovely story, really, and Ruth comes across as a really nice character. So, a great name,
Come on,
great character. Ruth is my wife's name, so it's no bad thing.
I'm going to start with the book of Ruth, a book that is very popular for many people because they think it's a lovely story about mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relations. And so it is, in one sense. It's certainly a very female-oriented book.
Where you find the book of Ruth depends on which Bible you're reading. If you're reading the Hebrew Bible, then you'll find Ruth later on towards the writings. But if you're reading a Greek or an English Bible like this one, Ruth occurs towards the beginning. It's among the former prophets here, just after Judges and before Samuel. And it's placed there because that's where it fits historically in the story. The novel of Ruth is set in the time of the Judges. That's after the people of Israel have been brought out of exile and before they're ruled by an administration and before the monarchy.
So the story of Ruth, very short, just 4 chapters. And Ruth, actually, she's not a Jew, she's actually a Gentile. She's what's referred to as a Moabitess, so from Moab, which is just east of the Dead Sea, so in modern day Jordan. And the story of Ruth is really about 2 main female characters, one Naomi and then secondly Ruth. So what we read in the first chapter of Ruth is that Naomi marries a figure called Elimelech, but there's a famine in Israel. They live in Bethlehem, in fact. There's a famine there, so they travel to Moab to find food. They have 2 sons, and these 2 sons take women from Moab as their wives. It turns out that Elimelech, so Naomi's husband, dies, and then subsequently the 2 sons also die.
Naomi finds herself as a widow. And her 2 daughter-in-laws, they're also widowed. And so the whole family, Ruth and her sister Orpah and her mother-in-law Naomi, find themselves in a crisis because they lack protection, they lack a place in society, and they lack security and provision.
Now what happens is Naomi at this point hears that in Bethlehem in Israel the famine has abated, so she can return there and desires to return there. And she says to her 2 daughter-in-laws, "You stay here. I'm going to go back. I'm going to make my life again there in Bethlehem, but you stay here. I'm going to leave you now. You go back to your mother's houses." But the daughter-in-laws have obviously got an affection for Naomi, and they say, "No, we'll come with you." So Naomi pleases them and says, "No, you stay." And at this point, one of the daughter-in-laws, Orpah, she does return to her mother's house. But Ruth shows a real loyalty.
And Ruth very famously says to Naomi, "I won't leave you. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God," which is often used in marriage services, in fact.
So Naomi's trying to convince Ruth to return. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law," so that's Orpah, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." So it's quite a touching loyalty that Ruth shows to her mother-in-law.
But in fact, it put Naomi in an awful pickle, because what was she to do with this daughter-in-law? She could go back to her people, but Ruth would just be a burden. And so when they go back to Bethlehem, where Naomi comes from, back to the Israelites, she calls herself Mara, bitter, empty, because Ruth is a burden. Ruth is nothing. You have these 2 women left alone for Naomi in a foreign country with no husband, no sons, all dead, nobody to look after them. And how are they going to survive?
So when they arrived back in Israel, they didn't really know anybody, but there was a man called Boaz who was distantly related to Naomi. So they made a home on Boaz's land, and in those days a stranger could glean from the fields, could take little bits of the corn harvest home to eat.
Gleaning is picking up little bits of barley or corn that are left by the reapers or from the edge of the field. And it's a right that you have under Jewish law. So it gives you a little sustenance, but obviously very little. To be allowed to take the corn that falls from in the middle of the field where the sheaves have been cut would give you a lot more, and that makes you a member of the clan. It's only as a member of the clan you would have a right to do that. And so Ruth, as an outsider, moves to being an insider by being given that right by Boaz.
Now, what's really significant for the rest of the Old Testament and for the Bible is that Boaz and Ruth then have a child called Obed, who becomes the grandfather in turn of King David. So this is setting up the royal line, or eventually leading to the royal line. And then at the beginning of Matthew, we read that this line extends from David then all the way through to Jesus himself.
The rabbis read it as a book about steadfast loving kindness, of people doing more than they need to. Ruth does more than she needs to. She is faithful to her mother-in-law. Naomi takes her, which is more than she needs to. Boaz redeems her legally, becoming her husband, which is more than he needs to. Everybody reaching out beyond. And again, people coming into the Jewish faith from outside.
The Book of Ruth is quite unusual because its central characters are two women, and more than that, the story is about their private family, ordinary life. So it's quite unique, and for this reason, some scholars have speculated that the book might have even been written by a woman.
Nobody knows who wrote the Book of Ruth. Some people think it might have been a woman because there is no book, even the Book of Esther, which is also about a woman, has, you might say, a slightly more male point of view. Women are foregrounded throughout. So who knows? It was an oral story at first, as we know by the fact that it has all this alliteration and is written with names that mean something so you could remember it. Nobody even knows when the Book of Ruth was written. It's got old-fashioned language at one point. The Book of Judges, however, and that period of the great heroes like Samson is very distant.
Ruth, this biblical Ruth, within this short story, she shows these real qualities of loyalty, devotion to Naomi, her mother-in-law, and the religion of Naomi. She's humble, she's some sort of quiet character. Boaz admires this loyalty and eventually takes her as his wife and provides to her, so her loyalty is rewarded. And these are all great qualities, and I like to think that Ruth is a really good name, and I like the qualities of Ruth's.
And is your Ruth like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ruth has been a very popular character and has an afterlife. She appears in the Ode to a Nightingale by the Romantic poet John Keats, where he writes of Ruth, "The sad heart of Ruth, when sick for home, she stood in tears amid the alien corn." So there's Ruth as the exile.